We are looking at an isolated stretch of land in the ancient Near East. A traveler has been struck down, their body left abandoned in the open dirt, far from any settlement. In standard ancient criminal proceedings, a conviction requires eyewitness testimony. Here, there are no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no footprints to follow. The system breaks down. Without a known suspect to cross-examine or indict, the courts face a complete legal deadlock. Traditional prosecution is impossible because there is no individual to prosecute. Ancient Israelite law treats an unsolved murder as an active spiritual contaminant. This creates an imbalance that the legal system is required to resolve, regardless of whether a suspect is ever found. To resolve this, the text of Deuteronomy 21 introduces a specific procedural mechanism. The law triggers when someone slain is found, and the identity of the slayer not being known. This mechanism is known as the Egla Arufa, the ritual of the broken-necked heifer. The Egla Arufa functions as a strictly enforced legal protocol, prioritizing procedural accuracy over the aesthetics of the rite. By deploying this procedure, the biblical text legally shifts the burden of bloodshed. When an individual perpetrator cannot be found, culpability is forcefully redirected onto the surrounding society. The immediate procedural response, outlined in verse 2, demands that magistrates leave their chambers and travel directly to the crime scene. These are not local deputies. The text specifies the elders and judges, which the Talmud identifies as members of the Great Sanhedrin, the supreme court of the nation. This diagram illustrates their mandatory first action. The judges must physically measure the exact distances outward from the corpse to every surrounding settlement. They are not looking for physical clues or forensic evidence in the dirt. They are strictly determining which municipality is geographically closest to the victim. Once the measurements confirm the nearest city, that specific town is immediately burdened with the legal and spiritual responsibility for the unsolved crime. Modern legal codes typically close a case when evidence runs dry, leaving liability unassigned. This ancient law actively addresses the void in individual liability by drafting an entire town into the proceedings. We can call this a jurisprudence of proximity. If individual guilt fails, the law defaults to spatial and systemic guilt, forcing the nearest community to answer for the dead. With the city identified, verses 3 and 4 outline rigid physical constraints for the expiation ritual itself, dictating both the sacrificial animal and the location. First, the local elders must procure a 1-year-old heifer that has never been worked and has never pulled a yoke. Second, they must transport this animal down into a hard, ever-flowing wadi, a rugged river valley that has never been tilled or sown for agriculture. This matrix outlines the final physical act. The elders strike the animal's neck with a hatchet in the middle of this barren valley, creating a distinct 3-part relationship between the unworked heifer, the untilled valley, and the slain victim. The 11th century commentator Rashi, drawing directly from Talmud Tractat Sota 46a, explains the underlying logic connecting these seemingly arbitrary rules. Rashi identifies a strict thematic concept unifying all 3 elements, the state of being fruitless. First, a young animal is selected precisely because it has not yet produced the fruit of labor, nor has it birthed offspring. Second, it is dispatched in a rocky valley that has never produced the fruit of an agricultural harvest.
Third, these actions are performed to expiate for a victim who was violently prevented from producing future fruit, whether that means further labor or descendants. This commentary reveals a highly codified logical system embedded within the ritual's physical requirements. The entire ritual operates on a rigid symbolic architecture, mourning unrealized potential. The procedure forces the physical environment to mirror the exact tragedy of a life cut short. After the animal is slain, the elders of the city physically wash their hands in the riverbed over the carcass. As they wash their hands, verse 21:7 dictates a mandatory verbal declaration they must recite. Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. This exact wording raises a foundational analytical question. Why is a denial of direct murder required here? Rashi points out the obvious issue, asking, would it enter anyone's mind that the elders of the court are suspect of bloodshedding? These men are the supreme magistrates of the region. it is legally absurd to suspect that a panel of senior judges committed highway robbery and stabbed a traveler to death. Because a literal reading of the text creates an impossible legal paradox, the true meaning of the elder's oath must lie elsewhere. Drawing from Tractate Sota 45b, Rashi resolves the paradox. He explains the oath actually means, "We never saw him and knowingly let him depart without food or escort." The elders are not denying the physical, kinetic act of plunging a knife into the victim. They are instead issuing a sworn denial of administrative and systemic negligence. First, they must affirm they did not allow a transient to leave their municipal jurisdiction without basic provisions like food. Second, they must verify they did not allow this transient to travel the open roads without a protective escort. The logic is strictly causal. A hungry traveler might be forced to steal to survive, putting them in lethal danger, or a lone traveler simply becomes an easy, isolated target for bandits. By failing to provide this social safety net, the city actively creates the environmental conditions necessary for murder to occur. This interpretation completely expands the definition of a killer in ancient Near Eastern jurisprudence. Within this legal framework, a municipality's failure to provide essential hospitality and security is treated as a direct physical crime. A dereliction of civic duty is legally equivalent to shedding blood with their own hands. The immediate result of completing this ritual and swearing the oath is kapara, communal absolution for the city. However, verse 21:9 includes a final mandate. Thus, you will remove from your midst guilt for the blood of the innocent. This raises a final critical question. What happens to the city's absolution if the actual murderer is discovered a week or a year later? Rashi provides the definitive legal ruling. The Egla Arufa ritual grants absolutely no amnesty to the actual perpetrator. If found, the individual murderer must still face trial and the death penalty. The text separates the guilt of the system from the guilt of the individual. The city repents for its negligence, but the killer remains fully liable for the act. The Egla Arufa operates as a dual-track system. It relentlessly pursues individual guilt first, but when that fails, it forces society into a rigorous audit of its own civic duties, recognizing that unchecked violence in the open field is ultimately a communal failure.